So next step is restoring using organisms. So I mentioned before that normally people focus on plants when they're doing restorations, but there's some evidence to show that animals can sometimes speed up the process and do some things that would be more difficult otherwise. So the term for this is rewilding, and it's the reintroduction of top carnivores to regulate the system from the top down. So if you'll remember, we talked about the wolves in Yellowstone, and that would be an example of rewilding. Others use the term for reintroduction of other trophic levels too. So it might not, depending on who's talking, they might use it either for top carnivores or for other trophic levels, but usually it means animals. So an example is, and I'm not going to pronounce the name of this nature reserve that's near Amsterdam because that's way too many syllables for me. But they reintroduced large herbivores starting in the 1980s to mitigate the effects of human development and to try and move restoration forward more quickly. Unfortunately, a lot of the native species, because this is in the Netherlands and in Europe, a lot of the native species were already extinct, so they couldn't bring those back. So they used surrogates, so things that were as close as they could come up to the things that were native to that area and reintroduced those. So aurochs, wild cattle, are extinct, but they introduced heck cattle, which they thought were relatively comparable. Tarpans, which are wild horses, are also extinct, so they introduced Koenig ponies instead, and then they also introduced red deer. And this is a picture. They found that the populations did well, and the grasslands and marsh began to recover. The grazing cut down on the woody vegetation, and they found that endangered birds began to recolonize. They plan to connect it to other reserves in the future to allow movement of herbivores and the potential colonization of carnivores. I will say that this particular place has been a little bit controversial because I think that because there were no predators in this area, there was a time in the last 10 years where there wasn't enough growth, or some of these herbivores, the populations got too large, and some of the individuals didn't have enough food, and so that was kind of an animal rights issue that was in some of the papers. But if there had been carnivores present, that may not have happened.